Last week we looked at Jesus in the Psalms through Psalm 1, Psalm 2, and Psalm 3. For this coming Sunday, we're going to skip over a few Psalms to Psalm 8. Psalm 8 begins with a verse upon which many people have pondered and have led them to write songs. Majesty of God, how majestic is your name. Song after song has talked about the majesty of God. Later in the psalm, we're going to see the psalmist depict the dignity of humankind. That in addition to being a focus upon the majesty of God, he also finds that there's some dignity in human beings, that God is above and majestic and mighty, and humans also have value. We're going to discover what that looks like in Psalm 8, so I encourage you to keep watching, and welcome again to this vlog. Welcome back. We're going to be, as I said, looking into Psalm 8. If you read Psalm 8, which is actually a pretty brief read, even though it's brief, it is packed full of power, beginning with the reminder that God is majestic. The rest of the psalm, in fact, the rest of life, will not make sense until we grasp that truth, that God is majestic. Picture the psalmist, perhaps David, out in the Middle East, looking upon the skies. There's no light pollution, not much sound around, just sitting out in nature, looking upon the majesty of God in day and night. And this is where we find the psalmist, in this setting of majesty, displaying the majesty of God. So he starts broad, if you will, and thinks about the majesty of God, and then begins to do some self-reflection. And he comes to the question of, God, when I see all that there is, when I see the handiwork, when I see the things that you've accomplished and the things that you've created and the things that you've done, and then I look upon myself, I ask the question, who am I? Am I of any importance? That's a question all of us ask. And I like the answer that he comes up with, because what he realizes in Psalm 8 is that in regard to God's majesty, it's unfathomable. And sometimes we can think of God's majesty and think, well, that makes us so much less than. Partly right. Yes, it's less than, but it doesn't mean we're insignificant. You see, God called us into being and created us, and therefore we have innate value because God made us. Anything God makes has value. And the psalm makes sure to tell us that above all things that God has created is where we find ourselves. Everything is important. The grass, the trees, the stars, the moon, the skies, all that's important. But God has a special place in his heart for men and women and people of all ages as they discover God's purpose for their lives. So this coming Sunday, we're going to be talking about what it means to recognize the majesty of God and the dignity of humankind. I encourage you to come be a part of this and listen to this time as we come together to study that psalm. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for watching the vlog. I want to share with you some exciting news now. On April 7th, most easily on Amazon.com, you can get a copy of my new book, The Ordinary Way, A Unique Way to Live. In that book, I talk about my passion of teaching men and women and people of all ages how to give their everyday lives to Christ. This is going to be a great way to really understand what moves this drive towards living for Christ, and really gives you an idea of where we are headed on a regular basis here at Rabbit Creek Church, talking about living our everyday lives for Christ. So I hope you get a copy of that. Again, most easily on Amazon.com on April 7th. You can order your copy. If you're watching this before April 7th, you can order that pre-order. Just go ahead and click, and appreciate you doing so. Thanks again for watching.